Ambassador Rachel Stone stepped through the airlock of the massive space station, her heart beating fast with excitement and nervousness. She had traveled for 3 weeks through hyperspace to reach this place, the Galactic Council station orbiting a beautiful blue planet called Kepler 442b. This was humanity's big chance to join the most important group in the galaxy. The station was huge, bigger than any city on Earth. Through the windows, she could see the blue planet below, its surface covered with swirling clouds and vast oceans. But what amazed her most were the aliens walking through the corridors. Some looked like giant insects with many arms. Others seemed to float in the air, their bodies made of what looked like living crystal. There were creatures that breathed gas from tanks on their backs, and beings so strange she could not even describe them. "Ambassador, we need to go to the main chamber now," said Lieutenant James Walker, her young assistant. He looked nervous too, constantly checking his notes and straightening his uniform. Behind him walked 3 men in simple black suits, her security team. The leader of her security was Captain David Harrison. He was an ordinary-looking man, not very tall, not very strong, with brown hair and quiet brown eyes. Most people would forget him 5 minutes after meeting him. But Rachel knew better. Captain Harrison had been a soldier for 20 years, fighting in places most people had never heard of. He was the kind of man who could disappear into a crowd or take apart an enemy squad with equal ease. "Remember," Rachel told her small group of humans, "we are here to prove that Earth deserves a place at this table. Let's show them our best side." The doors to the council chamber opened with a soft sound. Rachel gasped. The room was enormous, like a giant bowl that could hold thousands of people. Seats rose up in circles, filled with the strangest creatures she had ever seen. Some delegates had tentacles instead of arms. Others had multiple heads or eyes that glowed in the dark. The air buzzed with the sounds of hundreds of different languages being translated by machines. At the center of the room stood a creature that looked like a giant praying mantis, but covered in beautiful green and gold scales. This was the council speaker, the one who ran these meetings. It raised one of its clawed hands, and the room became quiet. "The species called human will now present their case," the speaker announced. Its voice came through machines that changed its alien speech into words Rachel could understand. Rachel walked to a small platform in the center of the room. She could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching her every move. Some looked curious, others seemed bored, and a few looked openly unfriendly. One delegate that looked like a 6-legged bear was making growling sounds that her translator could not handle. "Honored members of the council," Rachel began, speaking clearly so her voice would carry through the chamber, "humanity comes to you today not to ask for your help, but to offer our help to you. We want to be partners in making the galaxy a better place." A sound like laughter rippled through the crowd. A delegate that looked like a floating jellyfish spoke up, its words coming through the translation system. "Partners? Your people have barely learned to travel between stars. What could babies teach their elders?" Rachel kept smiling, though she felt Captain Harrison move slightly behind her. It was a tiny movement, but she knew he was ready for trouble. "We may be young, but we have learned important lessons. On our world, we have fought many wars, but we have also learned how to make peace. We know how to turn enemies into friends." "Your reputation for fighting comes before you," said another delegate, this one looking like a tree made of living diamonds. "Our computers are full of stories about human wars. Your species seems to love violence." The chamber erupted in noise as hundreds of aliens began talking at once. Their translation machines could barely keep up. Some aliens nodded in agreement, while others seemed to be arguing with each other. Rachel noticed Captain Harrison's hand move closer to his weapon, a movement no alien would understand, but one that told her he was watching for danger. "Yes, we have fought wars," Rachel said, raising her voice above the noise. "But we have also learned that real strength comes from choosing not to fight. We have learned that the strongest people are those who protect others, not those who hurt them." The debate went on for hours. Different species asked questions about human history, human technology, and human intentions. Some were worried that humans were too violent to be trusted. Others wondered if a species so new to space travel could really help civilizations that were millions of years old. As the day went on, Rachel began to feel more hopeful. While many delegates were not excited about humans joining the council, they seemed willing to think about it. The vote would happen tomorrow, giving all the different alien governments time to talk it over. Captain Harrison came up to her as the meeting ended and aliens began leaving the chamber. "I think we should be extra careful tonight. Some of these species don't seem happy about having new neighbors." Rachel nodded, gathering her papers. "I agree, Captain. But I have to say, today went better than I hoped. Even that diamond tree creature seemed to warm up to us by the end. Let's hope tomorrow goes just as well, Harrison said, though his eyes kept watching the aliens as they left the chamber. As they walked back to their rooms, none of them saw the dark ships moving into position far from the station. These ships had technology that made them invisible to the station's sensors. The Kithra had been watching and waiting for exactly this moment. They had been thought dead for thousands of years, but they were very much alive, and very angry about what had happened to their old empire. Tomorrow's vote would bring more than just a decision about human membership in the council. The morning of the big vote started with bright lights and ceremony throughout the huge space station. Ambassador Rachel Stone had spent all night reading her final speech, while Captain David Harrison checked every corner of their rooms for danger. The station was buzzing with activity as aliens from across the galaxy got ready for what many thought would be a day that made history. Rachel walked into the council chamber to find even more creatures than yesterday. News about the human request had spread, bringing visitors from species that rarely came to these meetings. Strange jellyfish-like beings floated near the ceiling, while rock creatures that looked like walking mountains sat in specially built chairs that could hold their weight. "This meeting will now begin," announced the giant mantis-like speaker, its voice echoing through the huge room. "Today we vote on letting the species called human become full members of our council." Rachel took her place at the speaker's platform, with her small group of humans standing behind her. Captain Harrison stood straight and alert, his eyes moving constantly around the crowd. Something felt different today, there was tension in the air that had not been there yesterday. "Before we vote," the speaker continued, "the Eldrani delegate will speak." The creature that looked like a living diamond tree began to glow with soft blue light as it stood up. After thinking carefully, the Eldrani people find good things in the human request. "Your species shows promise, even though you like to fight." A surprised murmur went through the chamber. The Eldrani almost never supported new species joining the council. Their ancient civilization usually thought younger races were not good enough. Rachel felt hope growing in her chest. "Furthermore," the diamond being continued, "we suggest letting humans join us slowly, allowing them to take part in our talks while we watch how they do." Suddenly, all the lights went out. Emergency red lights came on a few seconds later, making the huge chamber look scary and strange. The station's metal walls groaned loudly, and several aliens cried out in fear as the massive structure shook around them. "What is happening?" Rachel asked, turning to Harrison. The captain had pulled out his communicator and was trying to call the station's guards. "I don't know. No one is answering our calls." His voice stayed calm, but Rachel could see him change from a ceremonial guard into a ready warrior. The chamber's big screen flickered and showed the space around the station. Sleek, dangerous-looking ships had appeared from nowhere, their design unlike anything in the galaxy's computer files. Bright energy beams shot out from the mystery ships, hitting the station's defenses with perfect aim. "Listen, Council of Liars," a voice boomed through the chamber's speakers. The translation machine struggled with the strange language before settling on words everyone could understand. "You sit in our old homes, making decisions about lands that belong to us. The Kithra have returned to take back what was stolen." Fear exploded throughout the chamber. The beautiful crystal beings moved with desperate speed, their bodies making harsh musical sounds as they ran toward the exits. Creatures with many arms climbed over each other, while the gas-breathing aliens sealed their suits and headed for their escape pods. "Kithra?" Rachel grabbed Lieutenant Walker's arm as he tried to guide her toward the doors. "I thought they were all dead." "So did everyone else," Walker replied, his face white with fear. "Our computers say they died out 3,000 years ago." Another explosion shook the station, and the artificial gravity went crazy. Several aliens were thrown to the floor, their strange bodies making them much more likely to get hurt than the humans. The main door to the chamber suddenly exploded inward, covering the area with broken metal and dust. Through the smoking hole came figures in advanced battle armor, their weapons pointed at the fleeing council members. The Kithara warriors moved like hunting cats, their helmeted heads scanning the chaos with obvious pleasure. "Nobody leaves," their leader commanded, its voice made louder by suit speakers. "The council will watch the return of the Kithara Empire." Rachel found herself pressed against a support column as aliens ran past her in all directions. The Kithara soldiers began forcing the delegates back toward the center of the chamber like sheep, their energy weapons crackling with deadly power. "Captain Harrison," she called out, but the soldier was nowhere to be seen. In all the confusion, her security team had been separated from her. The Kithara leader stepped onto the speaker's platform, its armor covered with scars from many battles. 3,000 years ago, you drove us from our worlds. You said we were extinct. You cut up our territory and gave it to weaker species. The warrior's helmet turned toward the terrified delegates. Today, we begin taking back what is ours. More Kithara soldiers poured through other entrances, their movements organized and efficient. Unlike the panicking council members, these warriors moved with the confidence of a species born for war. They began separating delegates by species, forcing them into groups with casual cruelty. The human group will step forward, the leader commanded. Rachel felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to walk calmly toward the center of the chamber. Lieutenant Walker and 2 other human staff members joined her, their faces tense but controlled. Humans, the Kithara leader said thoughtfully, studying them through its helmet sensors. The newest applicants. How convenient. Your first lesson in galactic politics will be watching your potential friends die. To make his point clear, one of the Kithara soldiers struck down an old insect-like delegate who had been moving too slowly. The creature's painful cry echoed through the chamber. Rachel watched in horror as more council members fell to Kithara brutality. These were not soldiers or warriors, they were diplomats, scientists, and teachers from species that had mostly moved beyond violence. Against the Kithara's military skill, they were helpless. But somewhere in the chaos, moving through the shadows cast by emergency lighting, Captain David Harrison had completely disappeared. And for the first time since the attack began, the Kithara were about to learn why humans had earned their place among the stars not through diplomacy or technology, but through their mastery of something much more basic and deadly. Captain David Harrison had vanished the moment the lights went out, disappearing into the shadows like smoke. While the council chamber filled with screaming and chaos, he slipped through a small maintenance door he had spotted during his safety check the day before. The station's hidden corridors were like a maze of pipes, wires, and crawl spaces meant for repair robots. Harrison moved through them with the smoothness of a man who had spent 20 years learning how to be invisible. His sharp hearing tracked the heavy footsteps of Kithara soldiers through the metal floors above him. They were good fighters, better than most species humanity had met, but they had never hunted on a world like Earth. Earth had taught humanity lessons that no other species in the galaxy seemed to know. While civilizations like the Crystal Eldrani had grown up in peaceful gardens and the gas-breathing Vorthak had developed in safe cloud cities where nothing hunted them, humans had climbed to the top of a food chain filled with creatures that wanted to eat them. Harrison stopped at a crossing, listening carefully. Heavy boots, 2 Kithara soldiers walking toward the station's control room. He checked his gear, a standard pistol, a combat knife, and his brain. Against enemies with better armor and weapons, it would have to be enough. The first Kithara soldier never knew death was coming. Harrison dropped from an overhead shaft like a spider, his knife finding the small gap between helmet and chest armor with surgical precision. The warrior's energy weapon clattered to the floor as Harrison caught the falling body and lowered it without sound. The second soldier had barely started to turn when Harrison's stolen energy weapon fired once. The Kithara fell, its armor system sparking and dying. Harrison quickly took useful equipment from both bodies, extra ammunition, a helmet with translation software, and portable energy shields. Unit 7, report your status, crackled over the comm system in the first soldier's helmet. Harrison smiled grimly and turned on the device. Unit 7, area secure. Moving to next checkpoint. The Kithara language was harsh and rough, but the helmet's computer systems helped change his voice to sound like theirs. Message received. In the council chamber, the Kithara leader was enjoying his moment of victory. The surviving aliens huddled in scared groups while his soldiers watched them with weapons ready. Ambassador Stone stood bravely among her people, refusing to show fear even though their situation seemed hopeless. Your species interests me, human, the Kithara commander said, walking toward Rachel. Your files show you have strong military power, yet you send diplomats instead of warriors to represent you. Are you cowards, or just stupid? We prefer talking to fighting, Rachel replied steadily. Though that doesn't mean we cannot defend ourselves when we need to. The commander's helmet tilted in what might have been amusement. Defend? With what? I count 4 humans against my attack force of 60 elite warriors. You need to learn math better. What the Kithara leader did not know was that his attack force was no longer 60 strong. In the past 20 minutes, Harrison had reduced that number by 7, each kill done with the kind of cold efficiency that only came from years of combat experience. The missing soldiers were reported as checking problems or securing other areas, but the truth was simpler, they were dead. Harrison had learned something important during his quick look at Kithara equipment. Their armor was built to stop energy weapons and normal bullets, but the species had never faced anything like human close combat fighting techniques. Their helmets had limited side vision, and their joint movement, while advanced, was designed for their natural way of moving. Humans, however, had learned to kill things much bigger and stronger than themselves. The next group of Kithara soldiers was investigating reports of communication failures in the station's lower levels. Harrison waited in the darkness of a power room, having turned off the local lights. When they entered with weapon lights blazing, he struck from 3 different directions in quick succession. The first died when Harrison dropped from above, driving his knife through a helmet eye port. The second fell to a carefully thrown wrench that crushed its throat. The third managed to raise its weapon before Harrison's stolen energy rifle ended the fight. "Command, this is Strike Team 3, Harrison reported over the stolen comm system. Small technical problems in lower power areas. Suggest staying away from this section until repair robots can fix the lighting. Message received, Strike 3. Continue patrol." Back in the council chamber, the Kithara leader was getting worried. Several of his units had gone quiet, reporting various technical problems and equipment failures. While not unusual during a complex operation, the pattern was starting to concern him. "Status report, all units," he commanded over the comm. The answers came back slowly and unevenly. Some units reported everything was fine, others mentioned minor technical issues, and a few did not respond at all. In the space of an hour, his 60-soldier attack force had been cut down by an enemy he could not see, could not track, and apparently could not kill. The Kithara had conquered 17 star systems through better technology and ruthless tactics. They had defeated species with advanced weapons, smart defenses, and greater numbers. But they had never faced an enemy that treated warfare not as a clash of technologies, but as a hunt. Harrison studied the council chamber through security cameras he had accessed from an unmanned observation post. 37 Kithara soldiers remained, their positions strong but static. They were thinking like occupiers, not hunters. They had secured their target and were keeping control, which made them predictable. Time to change the rules of the game. The lights in the council chamber flickered and died, throwing the vast space into near-total darkness. Emergency systems turned on moments later, but the damage was done. The Kithara soldiers' night vision was overwhelmed by the sudden change, and their helmet systems took precious seconds to adjust. In those seconds, David Harrison entered the chamber like death itself. The emergency red lights made the council chamber look like a nightmare, full of dark shadows and black corners where anything could be hiding. The Kithara soldiers, trained for normal warfare, found themselves fighting an enemy that had perfected unusual tactics over millions of years of evolution. Captain David Harrison moved through the chaos like a ghost, appearing and disappearing between support pillars and broken furniture. While the Kithara were busy trying to fix the lights and communications, he systematically destroyed their positions from angles they never expected. The first soldier died when Harrison came up from under a fallen piece of debris, his knife finding the armor's weak spot at the base of the neck. The warrior collapsed without making a sound, its weapon disappearing into the shadows along with its killer. "Enemy contact. Attacker in the chamber," shouted another Kithara, firing wildly into the darkness. The energy blasts lit up the chamber in brief, flashing moments, but Harrison was never where they expected him to be. He had spent years studying the psychology of combat, understanding how even advanced species thought during high-stress situations. The Kithara were looking for a normal enemy, someone who would fight like a soldier. But Harrison was not fighting like a soldier. He was hunting like a human. The second kill came from above. Harrison had climbed the chamber support beams, using handholds meant for maintenance crews. When a Kithara soldier passed beneath, investigating the previous contact, Harrison dropped silently behind it. The warrior's last feeling was a hand covering its helmet's audio sensors before the knife found its mark. Ambassador Rachel Stone watched in horrified fascination as the Kithara formation began to fall apart. Their leader was shouting orders in their harsh language, trying to keep his soldiers together, but his warriors were being picked off one by an enemy they could not see or predict. "What is happening?" whispered the Eldrani delegate, its crystal body flickering with nervous energy. "Survival of the fittest," Rachel replied quietly. "Galaxy style." The Kithara leader was beginning to understand that he faced something he had never seen before. His soldiers were elite warriors, veterans of battles across multiple star systems, but they were being systematically eliminated by a single opponent using primitive tactics. Their advanced armor and energy weapons were proving useless against an enemy that refused to fight them directly. "Fall back to defensive positions," the commander ordered. "Create overlapping fields of fire." It was the right tactical decision, but it came too late. Harrison had already identified the Kithara's weakness. They thought like a civilized species. Their tactics were based on fighting enemies who battled for territory, resources, or strategic advantage. They had never met a species that fought for the simple reason that they were very, very good at it. The third kill demonstrated this perfectly. A Kithara soldier had taken position behind an overturned council table, its weapon trained on the most likely approach routes. Harrison came from the one direction it had not considered, straight through the table itself. The human had noticed during his scouting that the council furniture was made from lightweight materials, designed to be moved easily by species with different physical abilities. Harrison simply punched through the table's surface, grabbed the surprised warrior by its helmet, and yanked it backward into his knife. By now, the surviving council delegates had realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The graceful Eldrani huddled together, their musical communications creating an eerie soundtrack to the violence. The multi-armed Carathians watched with what might have been professional appreciation, while the gas-breathing Vorthak had sealed themselves in their environmental suits and were trying to become as small as possible. "How is one human doing this?" demanded the insect-like Zephyrian delegate, its translator struggling with the creature's agitated harmonic patterns. Lieutenant Walker, crouched beside Ambassador Stone, offered a grim smile. "Because we are really, really good at killing things." The statement would have seemed like empty boasting from any other species. Coming from humans, it was simply a statement of biological fact. The Kithara leader was down to 20 soldiers now, and panic was beginning to set in among his remaining forces. These were warriors who had conquered star systems, but they had never faced an enemy that seemed to enjoy the hunt itself. Their weapons were designed to kill at long range, their tactics assumed enemies who would gather for conventional battles. Harrison, meanwhile, was demonstrating why humans had dominated Earth's ecosystem despite being relatively small, slow, and weak compared to the planet's other top predators. They had become persistence hunters, capable of tracking prey for days, and they had developed the ability to use tools and tactics that turned their environment into a weapon. The fourth kill proved this point. Harrison had noticed that the chamber sound systems were still partially working, designed to carry voices clearly to every corner of the vast space. He used this to his advantage, throwing his voice to create false contacts that drew Kithara soldiers out of position. When one warrior moved to investigate sounds coming from the eastern side of the chamber, Harrison was waiting in a maintenance alcove the alien could not have known existed. The knife work was precise and professional, but what truly disturbed the watching delegates was Harrison's expression, calm, focused, and completely without regret. The Kithara leader made his final mistake when he tried to use the hostages as leverage. "Show yourself, human," he commanded, pressing his energy weapon against the Eldrani delegate's crystal form. "Surrender, or I execute them one by one." Harrison's voice emerged from the shadows, seeming to come from multiple directions at once thanks to the chamber's acoustics. "You already sentenced them to death when you attacked this station. The only question now is whether you live to see the consequences." It was not empty threats or psychological warfare. It was a simple statement of intent from a member of the only species in the galaxy that had turned violence into an art form, then chosen to practice restraint. The hunt was almost over, and everyone in the chamber, human, alien, and Kithara alike, was beginning to understand that they had witnessed something that would change galactic politics forever. The end came quickly and with a terrible finality that would be talked about in alien schools for generations to come. Captain David Harrison emerged from the shadows not as a soldier seeking victory, but as a top predator who had simply finished his hunt. The remaining Kithara soldiers found themselves facing something their advanced civilization had never prepared them for, a human who had embraced his species' evolutionary heritage. The Kithara leader, his weapon still pressed against the crystal Eldrani delegate, suddenly realized that his hostages were not protection, they were simply additional problems for his opponent to solve. Harrison appeared behind him as if he had materialized from the darkness itself, moving with the kind of fluid precision that only came from years of practice. "Let them go," Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite being barely louder than a whisper. The Kithara commander spun around, trying to track the sound, but Harrison was already moving. The human's knife took the warrior's weapon hand at the wrist with surgical precision, while his other hand caught the falling energy rifle before it could clatter to the deck. "Surrender," Harrison continued, now holding the Kithara's own weapon trained on the remaining soldiers. "Your attack has failed. Your ships are surrounded by Council defense forces that arrived 20 minutes ago. You have nowhere to run." The truth was even more devastating than the lie. Harrison had monitored the station's communications throughout the fight, and he knew that no help was coming. The Kithara fleet was still in control of the area, and the Council's defensive forces were hours away at best. But the surviving Kithara soldiers did not know that. What they did know was that 60 elite warriors had been reduced to fewer than a dozen by a single human using primitive weapons and tactics their advanced military schools had never considered. The psychological impact was overwhelming. If one human could do this, what would happen when more arrived? Impossible, breathed the Kithara leader, dark blood leaking from his severed hand. The databases said you were a young species. Barely civilized. Your worlds have no military tradition worth mentioning. Ambassador Rachel Stone stepped forward, her diplomatic training overriding the shock of witnessing 20 minutes of efficient violence. That's where you made your first mistake. Our worlds have nothing but military tradition. We just learned when not to use it. The remaining Kithara soldiers looked at each other uncertainly. Their leader was wounded, their assault force destroyed, and they were facing an enemy that defied every tactical doctrine in their military database. The databases also said your species was extinct, Harrison added, checking the captured weapons power cell with professional competence. Intelligence failures seemed to be going around. Lieutenant Walker approached his superior officer with undisguised admiration. Orders, Captain? Secure the prisoners. Treat their wounded. And get me a channel to the station's emergency broadcast system. Harrison's voice was calm, businesslike. The violence was over, now came the harder part. As Walker and the other human staff began disarming the surrendered Kithara, the surviving council delegates slowly emerged from their hiding places. The Eldrani delegate's crystal form was cracked from stress fractures, while several other species showed signs of the kind of psychological trauma that came from witnessing apex predation up close. The tall insect-like Zephyrian delegate approached Rachel with obvious caution. Ambassador Stone, we owe you an apology. And perhaps, a re-evaluation of our previous discussions. There is nothing to apologize for, Rachel replied diplomatically. You were concerned about humanity's potential for violence. You should have been concerned about our capacity for restraint. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Every being in the chamber had just witnessed a human systematically dismantle a technologically superior enemy using nothing but primitive weapons and tactics that belonged in a museum. But they had also seen him spare the survivors when he could have easily killed them all. Captain Harrison approached the makeshift prisoner area where the surviving Kithara soldiers sat under guard. Their leader looked up at him with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been respect. What are you? The commander asked. Homo sapiens, Harrison replied matter-of-factly. Persistence hunters from a Class 4 death world. We evolved alongside saber-toothed cats, cave bears, and creatures that could crush our skulls with a single bite. We survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and much more patient than anything trying to eat us. He crouched down to the wounded Kithara's eye level. Your species developed advanced technology to avoid conflict. Ours developed advanced technology to end it quickly. The difference is that we learned when not to use our advantages. The implications of his words rippled through the chamber. Every council member present was beginning to understand that humanity's petition for membership had never been about whether they could contribute to galactic civilization, it had been about whether galactic civilization was ready for them. 3 hours later, Council Defense Forces finally arrived to find the station secure and the crisis resolved. The Kithara fleet, demoralized by their ground forces' failure, had withdrawn to hyperspace rather than face potential human reinforcements that might never have come. The emergency session that followed was unlike anything in the Council's history. Species that had been skeptical of human membership now competed to offer support. The Eldrani delegate, speaking through a replacement crystal form, made the motion that would be remembered for centuries. The Eldrani collective moves for immediate full membership for the human species, with all rights and privileges. Furthermore, we propose establishing them as the Council's official peacekeeping force. The vote was unanimous. Ambassador Rachel Stone stood at the same podium where the crisis had begun, looking out at faces that now showed respect instead of skepticism. The political landscape of the galaxy had shifted in the span of a single day, and humanity had earned its place among the stars not through diplomacy or technology, but by demonstrating that their greatest strength was knowing when not to use their greatest weapon. Members of the Galactic Council, she began, humanity accepts your offer of membership with gratitude and humility. We look forward to working with all of you to build a safer, more peaceful galaxy. She paused, allowing her words to carry weight before delivering her final statement. And we promise that what you witnessed today was not a threat, but a guarantee. As long as the Council stands for peace and justice, you will never face alone the kinds of enemies who would destroy what we have all worked to build.